The Penre Papers. A Journey Through the Multiverse. The Third Level of Learning. http://wespenre.com. The Third Level of Learning. Paper number 2, In Wait for Things to Come. By Penre, Friday, February 1, 2013. Part 3. 6. The Veil of Forgetfulness. This term comes from RA. This is similar to what I have said about the grid and the amnesia trap in earlier papers. The difference is that RA sees this veil as necessary for us to experience 3D. The veil of forgetfulness makes you forget your true identity and purpose as soon as you incarnate or reincarnate on Mother Earth. They say it's a space/time phenomenon and does not exist in time/space. This means that you only forget when you are in an incarnation, in a body, but between lives, time/space, you do remember. I wholeheartedly agree with this, as I have come to even newer conclusions regarding afterlife than what I had in level I and II. I will dedicate another whole paper on the subject later in this level. When asked why this veil has to be there, RA explains that without the veil there would be no potentials for misunderstanding, and thus no experience. And here is the interesting stuff. RA admits that the veil is a separation between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, which is dream state, and that it was purposely put there so we could have this experience. Well, put there by whom? Not the Orions, who created 3D, that is for sure. They wanted mankind to have their memories intact so we could experience 3D in one go and then move on. No, it was created by the SA to be the basic part of the control system. For some reason, RA is not mentioning this. Something to keep in mind. However, RA does explain that there was a time before the veil. However, they say that knowing instead of not knowing creates very little motivation to change and to expand one's consciousness. There are very few catalysts, and the evolution is compared to that between a turtle and a cheetah. However, once they realize that we are all one, these beings climb quickly to the highest densities. According to RA, the inhabitants of such planets were Sto, and this was in the beginning of this octave. It only happened on planets close to the galactic center, where the beings still had memories from the previous octave they had ascended from. However, when it became clear how slow the progress became in this octave without a veil, one such was created and has been present ever since on any developing planet, according to RA. This seems like good logic, unless we are aware of that there are two different universes, the 4% and the 96%. The purpose from the beginning was that 96% beings, those who were of, or had access to the KHAA, the 96%, should be able to experience the material universe if they so desired. It was supposed to be something fun and educational. Non-physical beings could take a physical body and experience the third dimension while still being multi-D. In other words, they were able to come and leave bodies at will. It had nothing to do with long learning experiences, it was like high spirit going on vacation by descending into matter. There was no death involved, and no reincarnation, unless the spirit wanted to switch bodies, but if so, it happened with memories intact. It was only when the Syrians came into the picture, which was much later, that things changed. They were the ones who created the separation between the conscious and unconscious mind, so we forgot who we were, and most importantly, once trapped in a 3D body, you couldn't get out. Then, when your body deteriorated in matter, the soul left the useless vehicle, but was now manipulated to go back into matter again to complete a goal that was not set by the soul in the first place. Not only on Earth, but on many, many planets in the universe, the Syrian overlords created a similar trap, and you got the 4% universe, a universe dictated and manipulated by them. The trapped souls who had lost their memories of who they were and why they were there had no other choice, it seemed, than to listen to those who seemed to know, the so-called gods or men of power. They told you how to look at the universe. They said that what you can perceive with your 5 senses is what reality is, and when you look up in the night sky you see stars and galaxies. But the blackness between the stars is just a nothingness that no one knows anything about. The only thing that exists is what you see. This manipulation, plus some tampering with our DNA, got us trapped in a very narrow frequency band, where only 4% of the universe is visible. They wanted us to believe that if there really is life out there, it's so far away that we can't reach it. We became isolated. In reality, we should be able to perceive all frequency bands at will, and if we did, the universe would not be black anymore, but filled up with particles almost everywhere. It would lighten up. You would be able to perceive all dimensions, and not only the 4 lowest ones, time included. The fact that RA does not mention any of this makes me very alert. That means that they are either only perceiving the 4% universe themselves, or they are holding back on vital information that can set us free. Or are they of the impression that mankind can only expand themselves in baby steps, and therefore the information they freely give out stays within the 4% frequency band? This could be a possibility, because the 4% universe has its own dimensions and densities. You don't have to experience all the higher bands of the spectrum to be able to travel between some dimensions and densities. This could very well be the case with RA. If they allowed us to ascend in a manner so we became multi-D right away, they are afraid we're going to be overwhelmed by all the new perceptions in the gamma spectrum, for example. If this is true, the sources we are channeling, because RA is not the only one teaching the same thing, is the slow way of becoming multi-D, one little step at the time, while the way I want to do it, based on material from anonymous sources, the Pleiadians, Seth, and a few more, is the faster way, but still safe. I would not want to take the channeled ascension route when I can do it in a much faster way. This will be obvious the more you read, and especially after you have read the book I'm going to write after I'm done with this level of learning. So, if this is close to how the sources think, and they want to help us through the ascension process in something they call the harvest, that would sound benevolent enough, wouldn't it? After all, it's nothing wrong with asking for help, is it? However, first of all, we have not asked for help. What has happened here is that we have a number of sources who say they are here to help us because they need to do this in order to advance, and be accepted into the Orion Empire, the KHAA, and not because we asked them to help us. Albeit, they are trying to make us think that we asked them for help. Therefore, something like helping us through a harvest is an interference and a break of universal laws. They know this, so therefore the purpose of doing it is not to be accepted by the Orion Empire, because they know the Empire would never agree with what they're doing. So there is another agenda here, and it seems to play right into that of the Syrian overlords, wittingly or unwittingly. I can hear many metaphysical researchers protest at this point and say that we can't go through the ascension process without help from the other side. First of all, yes, we can, because the way these metaphysical sources explain the process is one way of doing it, and I believe it's not benevolent either, and later I will explain why. All we do is we are moved from one box to another, but are still controlled. I have read a lot and listened to a lot of channeled information, and I am far from convinced that the transition is benevolent. Is what they are planning even possible? Yes, I believe it is, but why, when your body dies, would you put yourself in the hands of all these metaphysical beings and trust that they send you to where you want to go? Why give up your power and give it away to, it doesn't matter whomever, and then close your eyes and hope they are giving you paradise? That sounds pretty fishy to me. Instead, you can trust your own power and perceptions and do it all much better and faster on your own, once you understand the concept and the procedures how to do it. I have suggested many times, and I suggest it again, don't trust an outside power to go free. If they were benevolent, they would help you to self-help and not offer to do it for you. It doesn't work that way. This is a universe where the individual finds their own strength and abilities, and whatever needs to be done, it can be done by the individual soul. You want to do it in group? Sure, no problem. But I would suggest that if you do, the group members all need to have come to the same conclusions and then do it together. And they probably would need to be of the same soul group, humankind, for it to work. Aliens who are here don't need the same things we do. We are responsible for our own evolution. There are those who say that 3D, the way it is now set up, by the essay, is the best learning lesson you can ever imagine. In a very short time, relatively speaking, you learn more than non-physicals, or beings in other dimensions, learn in 1 million years. Oh yes, there is a lot of trauma, horror, torture, war, famine, separation anxiety, and God knows what, involved in the learning process with such catalysts as the bloodthirsty global elite, but fact remains, they say we learn quickly. It wasn't meant to be this way, but now that it is, there are apparently souls who want to incarnate here just to have this quick learning experience. But you see, up there time is different, and you are able to see the bigger picture. It's like you are Superman and can handle anything. So non-physicals are sometimes very tempted to go down here and change things around. However, once down here they find out quickly that it's not that easy in this dense reality. Furthermore, some say that everything is a co-creation. No one is a victim, we all have decided the ball part of our fate so we can learn even if we go through torture or famine. This is probably true, but there is still manipulation involved. All sides of the game do not have the same opportunities, because some know the secrets, and others don't. This makes it an unfair game, where the players all think they are in for it with the same opportunity for growth, but with manipulation involved, I would say that this is not true. We can sugarcoat what this trap is all about and try to see it from a positive angle, but it doesn't change the fact that it is a trap. No one is going to tell me how much of the spectrum I am allowed to see at once by putting me in a new box, which I don't even really know what it contains, only what some non-physical sources say it does. RA says. RA, the nature of vibration is such that it may be seen as having mathematically straight or narrow steps. These steps may be seen as having boundaries. Within each boundary there are infinite gradations of vibration or color. However, as one approaches a boundary, an effort must be made to cross that boundary. This is exactly where I differ. Second sentence. I look at it the opposite way. The whole thing is that the steps do not have boundaries, but blend in with each other. Someone who endorses Ra's teachings may say that what I am experiencing is a bleed through into the fourth density, but not even that indicates as being correct. I have read Ra's definitions of the different densities, and my experience is exactly that of the Pleiadians and others, that I can reach fifth or sixth density while sitting in my chair at work, or talking to people around a table, and then go back and forth. I do not feel like I am hitting any boundary at all, but that it is all fluid and blend together. But for some reason, the non-physical in this respect apparently want to describe them as boundaries. LPGC called the distinctions between the 7 superdomains boundaries as well, but they didn't mean it in a literal way. They, too, looked at the multiverse as being fluid. If we move further into the creation theory of RA, we notice that each galaxy is created by its own logos, which in this case can be compared with a creator god, or gods. The logos who created our particular star system also created 250 billion others, corresponding to all the star systems in the Milky Way galaxy. They also say that some galaxies are prone to having more negative harvest than others, i.e. STS is more pronounced in these galaxies, probably because of an experiment instigated by its logos, creator goddess. It appears, however, that RA decided, when they became evolved enough to nano-travel, to basically stay and work within our own Milky Way galaxy, except for some wanderers deaf who went to other major galaxies. These wanderers could tell about beings looking very different from those here in the Milky Way. In our own galaxy, RA says that 1/5 of all planets are inhabited in some density or another, which means not all of them are inhabited in 3D. If we, as 3D beings would travel to such a planet, we would probably find it barren. Some would be gas planets from our point of view, just like Jupiter and Saturn, which are supposedly both inhabited by beings of another frequency/density. Furthermore, RA explains that approximately 32% of all stars have planets around them, while another 6% have some kind of clustering materials which can be inhabited in some densities. Notice here that RA is all the time talking about the 4% universe. Then Dr. Elkins asks them what percentage of 3D beings from other star systems could move to Earth and walk among us without we noticing that they are aliens, and RA replies that it's 5% of all 3D races, while about 13 to 15% would look similar enough that you had to look twice to notice. They are still talking about the whole 4% universe. And lastly, in the 4% universe, on those planets, where beings are aware, 27% are in 3D, 16% in 4D, and 6% in 5D. The other 51% are of the other densities. RA is not the only source saying that we need 4th density bodies to be able to live on the 4th density Earth. The philosophy is therefore that we need to die before we can ascend. 4D bodies are waiting on the other side. Also, those who don't qualify will thus at that time be sent to a 3D planet somewhere else. So, according to Ra's hypothesis, no one is going to come here and beam anybody up in spaceships. Therefore, we will not be able to feel out this hypothesis, because we won't know until we die whether we qualify or not. And there, on the other side, RA and other social memory complexes will wait and lead us into the right fold. If you read this paragraph again and think about it, doesn't this sound awfully artificial? Is it a built-in part of creation that some social memory complexes from 6th density or such have to steer us in the right direction between lives? Shouldn't ascension be something that comes naturally? All I want is for the reader to ponder that for a minute before you continue. RA also have their view on the second coming. Dr. Elkins is asking if Jesus will return, and they say no, albeit, they claim that Jesus is a part of the Confederation and will only make himself present through channels. This to me is a disturbing comment, because the metaphysical researcher knows that this being who calls himself Jesus has been channeled by quite a few, but especially by the Galactic Federation of Light and the Ashta Command, which both clearly are Sirian channels, as we shall see. They even have U2 Shamash's winged sun disk as their logo. If RA claims Jesus to be part of the Confederation they are part of, and they say their Jesus is going to be channeled, and those channels are both Sirian in nature, what does that make RA and the Confederation? I'm just trying to put 2 and 2 together here. Although RA says that Jesus will not come back to Earth, there are others of the identical congruency of consciousness that will welcome those who go to the 4th density. This is the meaning of the second coming, says RA 21. I am sorry, but the picture I get in my head is very much similar to that we see in New Age channeling, such as the Ashta Command, where bearded, handsome men in their early 30s, such as Jesus himself and St. Germain come and hug us, dressed in long, white robes. That's a little bit too much for me to stomach. 7. The Orion Group friends or foes. Then again, RA is conveying the message about the Orion Group, which has caused so much confusion here on Earth, and they are accusing Orion of being the enemies. They claim that the Orions are the only negative density entities who can penetrate the veil here, not counting those who were already on the planet in the 1980s and are still here. RA says that the Orions are often the ones we see in the skies, piloting the so-called UFOs. They send out messages, and some of those are received by those who are oriented towards service to others. The messages are altered to be acceptable to those positive entities, while warning of difficult times ahead. This is, says RA, the most those negative entities can do to manipulate those of positive orientation. Not so, I would say. They can do, and are doing, a lot more than that. The contacts the Orion Group finds most rewarding, however, are those with a service to self orientation. The reason for this is that the STS beings are more on their wavelength and can be manipulated into becoming the minions of the Orion Group. So let's go over this once and for all. Why does the RA Collective talk about Orion when they are in fact definitely describing the Sirian Alliance? Well, the best reference is the Urantia book and Lucifer's Rebellion. This bright, beautiful, once very positively oriented being called Lucifer, rebelled towards God, or in reality, the goddess, managed to gather a support group behind him, and a war in heaven began. It ended with that Lucifer and his fallen angels were cast out of heaven, the Orion Empire, and descended upon Earth, and the fallen angels created the Nephilim etc. Aside from the Urantia book, where have we heard this story before? In virtually all ancient scriptures, such as the Bible, Satan in the Garden of Eden, and the Sumerian scripture, Enki as the serpent in the garden. I am saying in my papers with great emphasis that Enki is not Syrian but from Orion. He is the son of the goddess and her brightest angel. He is Lucifer. In his rebellion he gathered around him the Syrian overlords and the Pleiadians, the former whom had earlier signed the peace treaty with the goddess, see level 2, and from there on were considered members of the Orion Empire. Hence, Lucifer and his fallen angels also became known as the Orion group, the faction of Orion/Aryans who rebelled against the goddess. There lies the confusion, and most possibly the main reason why Orion has such a bad reputation here on Earth, described as shape-shifting reptilians by researchers as Ick and quite a few others. But Orion, dear reader, is our original home, and they are not our enemy. However, there is a group or a faction of Orions, who have created a bad reputation about the whole Orion Empire. Hence, I want to distinguish between the Orion Empire and the Orion group, by still calling the Syrian/Pleiadian/Orion group the Syrian Alliance, although they were led by an Orion being, Enki or Lucifer. So those who say they channel Enki and have positive experiences with this being are, I'm sorry to say, manipulated and deceived. In certain terms, Enki is worse than Enlil, and the Bible is correct when it labels Enki/Ea/Lucifer as Satan. Yahweh/Jehovah was a composite of beings, none of them benevolent, and two of those beings from this composite were the step-brothers, Enki and Enlil. Another was Anu himself, the king of kings back at Sirius. This is the reason why the Cassiopeans and others call the bad guys the Orion group. The Cassiopeans, however, are more to the point, talking about this group while on the other hand they also say that the cradle of humanity is in Orion and not in Lyra. I wrote a whole paper on Lord Enki, the cosmic vampire, in level 2, but now in level 3 it's time to bring it to a close and tell the reader who Enki really is. He has done a great job with convincing people here on Earth how good he was, by saving mankind from the deluge by talking to Utnapishtim, Noah. Yes, Lucifer saved mankind, but not out of compassion, but in order to control our planet, its inhabitants, and to eventually build an army to overthrow the goddess of the universe. This is Enki's real face. He is still Lucifer, the rebellion. So, in other words, the RA collective is correct when they label the negative entities the Orion group. In Ra's own words. Question: windows occur to let the Orion group come through once in a while. Are they needed as a balancing to prevent the Guardians from reducing their positive polarization by totally eliminating the Orion contact through shielding? B1, 150. RA, this is partially correct. Balancing allows an equal amount of positive and negative influx. In your particular planetary sphere, less negative information or stimulus is necessary than positive due to the somewhat negative orientation of your social complex distortion. B1, 150. Statement, by questioner: in this way, total free will is balanced so that individuals may have an equal opportunity to choose service to others or service to self. Is this correct? RA, this is correct. B1, 150. Statement, this is a profound revelation, I believe, in the law of free will. B1, 150. So, in other words, according to RA, there is a council located in the rings of Saturn, in a higher density, which has decided together with the Guardians, who are supposedly a group of entities living in the center of the Earth, equally in a higher density, to put a quarantine around Earth so that the Syrian Alliance, the Orion group, normally can't enter, in order to create a balance between good and evil, STO and STS. Humankind is polarized towards STS, so we need more positive influence to have a fair choice. Therefore, the Syrians who are not here on the planet already, are kept out with the help from those who maintain the quarantine. However, sometimes there are windows in the quarantine, which allows some Syrians to come in. In my opinion, though, the Syrians have no business here whatsoever. However, and here is the interesting part, many say that the quarantine now has been lifted. So we may ask ourselves what this really means. The people who tell us this see it as a positive thing, because we can now supposedly travel out in space, and easier communicate with positive ETS, etc. But if we are to believe RA, it basically means that the Syrians can come in here in droves if they like. And isn't that exactly what I have said that they are doing? Isn't this the reason why Syrians like U2 Shamash came through the quarantine window a couple of years ago and started preparing for the rest of his kind to come to Earth? Some of them have already arrived and now occupy human bodies here on Earth, but the main preparation and the opening of the stargates in conjunction with a lifted quarantine will pave the way for the rest of the gang to arrive. We are here talking about the invasion, Phase 2, which we shall discuss in much detail in later papers. In other places in the material, RA explains pretty well what the Orion group, i.e. the Syrians did. RA, the Yahweh group worked with those living on Mars 75,000 years ago to make the body bigger and stronger through a new genetic coding. B1, 174. However, the Orion group were able to use this distortion, larger body, to teach the thoughts of the elite. Those of the Orion group were able for the first time to make serious inroads upon the consciousness of the planetary complex. B1, 175. Question: what allowed the Orion group to succeed at this? RA, those who are strong, intelligent, etc. have a temptation to feel different from those who are less intelligent and strong. This allowed the Orion group to form the concept of the Holy War, as you may call it. This is a seriously distorted perception. There were many of these wars of a destructive nature. B1, 175. It is definitely no doubt that RA is talking about the Syrians here, and furthermore, they explain that they were the ones who built the stone monuments on the Easter Island. When Elkins asked why, RA explained that humans in that time period worshipped the Orion group as gods, and by building such monuments that represented an interdimensional force they couldn't disobey, the monuments themselves got power and were attracted to worship, and in the extension, the Syrian overlords could suck in these energies of fear and feed on them. The monuments were created by thoughts from a distance. Elkins also asks if there are anyone from the Orion group on Earth now, in the 1980s, and RA said no. However, they said that the group is here as a though form, in people's heads, as walk-ins and in genetically manipulated human bodies, but normally a robotic kind of being does their bidding. Elkins asks if these beings are the men in black, but RA says no. They did not elaborate further, because the Greys were not yet well known at that time, before Whitley Strieber wrote about his experiences in communion. The men in black are a thought form with the ability to somewhat materialize themselves here on Earth. Syrians using avatars is what it is. They can also dematerialize at will. And here is what they tried to do on me by trying to have me endorse the Sitchin material and get me in contact with U2 Shamash. Question: is it possible for a person to be confused and call on both the Confederation and the Orion group? RA, it is entirely possible. Many of your so-called contacts among your peoples have been confused and self-destructive because the channels were oriented towards service towards others, but, in the desire for proof, were open to the lying information of the Crusaders from Orion who were then able to neutralize the effectiveness of the channel. B1, 125. Most beings from the Orion group are fifth density negative, because they are the ones who most easily can penetrate the quarantine. The fourth density beings are more like servants to the fifth, or lower in the hierarchy, if you will. But don't make any mistake about it, whether the Council of Saturn, together with the Guardians, have set up a quarantine here or not, the Orion group, the Syrian Alliance, think they own this planet and are still in charge of the Stargate and the frequency machine. They have a soul group down here who can accommodate that. And here is something to think about for those who channel entities of love and light and think that as long as everything is friendly and cozy, and the vibrations are high, we're safe. Not so, necessarily. The Syrians are master manipulators. Here is Ra again. Question: why would one of us freely follow the negative entity? Ra, the positive polarity sees love in all things. The negative polarity is clever. B3, 140. And lastly on this subject, they explain how the Orion group, led by Enki, is manipulating the PTB. Ra, this negative entity will strive to offer these understandings to the other selves, most usually by the process of forming the elite, the disciples, and teaching the need and rightness of the enslavement of other selves for their own good. These other selves are conceived to be dependent upon the self and in need of the wisdom and guidance of the self, i.e., the elite group. B2, 130. We know from different sources, and I know from have been tightly connected with LPGC in the past, that not only are members of the SA present on the Earth's surface in human hybrid bodies, but some of them, who preferred to stay in a higher density, but still are stuck in the quarantine, according to Ra, and I think they are correct in this, state as a thought form, soul/spirit, in the inner planes of Earth. Interestingly enough, Ra calls these hidden entities the Dark Angels, which would correspond pretty nicely to some of Enki's fallen angels. Ra, temptations are offered by those negative entities of what you would call your inner planes. These, shall we say, Dark Angels have been impressed by the service to self path offered by those who have come through the quarantine from days of old. B1, 135. I brought up a lot of subject here regarding the Ra material, and did so for a reason. I think Ra represents pretty much what many other channeled sources represent as well, so I wanted to give the reader who is not too familiar with channeling a chance to understand the metaphysical universe of these entities. In later years, Ra has been channeled by David Wilcock. This is allegedly not the same quality of information as the Ruckert channeling, but still supposedly gives the listener some good insights. I haven't listened much to this version of Ra, however, but I will mention it some when we talk about the Elohim. In the next paper, we are going to address a few other prominent channeled sources. The purpose with that will be self-evident when we start talking about the galactic federations. I think the reader will appreciate the knowledge I am about to provide in the next few papers. Love. Wes Penre.